You're listening to eLearnChat, where talk is knowledge.
Hello and welcome to eLearnChat, our new podcast featuring prominent leaders, shakers and movers in the e-learning and training industry. Your co-hosts are Rick Zanotti and Terrence Wing.
Hi everyone, I'm Rick Zanotti and next to me is Terrence Wing. We are now doing eLearnChat episode number 28.
Woohoo!
Terrence, you want to introduce our guest today?
She needs no introduction, but those of you who are on the learning circuit, you've definitely bumped into her, whether she's working some gaming booth somewhere or off in some corner of the world playing a game. We have with us today Alicia Sanchez, also a games czar on Twitter. So welcome, Alicia.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, we're glad to have you. So why don't you tell us, we'll jump right in here, and why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do first?
Well, I'm the game czar for Defense Acquisition University, which basically means I get to decide when and where we should use games. And I also have a company named Zarina Games that's basically a games consultancy group that looks at some less conventional games, I guess you would say.
When you say less conventional, you can't leave us on a limb like that. You have to tell us more what less conventional means.
Well, not necessarily less conventional, but certainly not as confined as the work I do at Defense Acquisition, which are very practical, practice-oriented type of games. So under Zarina, I'm able to do some games that kind of have larger outreach potential.
Okay. And one of your partners on a game that we're going to be talking about today is in the chat room. He's under Hybrid Chris. So those of you that want to defend Alicia from the heckles that are going to come from Hybrid Chris, you can definitely do that by going into the chat room there.
Please.
So how did you and Chris connect? Because you're both from different worlds. And, well, not necessarily different worlds, but definitely different organizations. And you came together on this one game, or have you collaborated on other games?
This is our first game together, but we've known each other for years. And we just happen to be traveling in similar circles. And we both work with the Guild closely, so we're both familiar with all the Guild events. So when the opportunity came up to do a game for eLearnCon, we both sort of wanted to do something, and we thought it might be fun to do something together.
Now, how did you get into this the gaming field? Did you always just want to make games when you were a little girl?
You know, surprisingly, no. I actually I had a very unconventional path to where I've arrived. I did an undergrad in industrial organizational psychology, so I've always been interested in sort of adult education and training. And then I did a master's degree in liberal studies, if you can imagine how rigorous that was. And finally, I found my way to the PhD in modeling and simulation, which was, a very heavy in military training. And from there, games seemed to be a natural evolution.
So what kind of games are you doing with the military? I'm assuming it's military defense type games?
Well, under Defense Acquisition University, we really build games for education. Okay. And so I've worked in training before, and that was really fun. It's really great, but it's kind of obvious, right? I mean, you just sort of simulate the environment, you shoot things. And so I kind of got into the Defense Acquisition University types of games because I wanted to do something that was a little more, I guess, not necessarily sophisticated. Certainly there's a lot of sophistication in military games, but I wanted to do something that was a little less obvious and really take a look at games from the supporting educational perspective.
So let's not hold everybody on pins and needles anymore. Tell me about this collaboration that you and Chris did for your game. And I think we have a couple of screenshots of some graphics that you prepared for us. So if you can just kind of give Rick a heads up which one you're talking about, then I'm sure he'll be able to get the right one up there. But you created a game of phones. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the concept and what it is?
Sure. So A Game of Phones was actually Chris's brainchild. And as I said, we both sort of wanted to do a game for eLearn, and there was going to be an opportunity to do one. So we decided to collaborate. And our first real step in the design of this game was to really think about who the audience was. And, I do a lot of these engagement in organizations and organizational learning things. And I think that the big key in all of these types of games are relevance and motivation. And so when we thought about who our initial crowd was going to be, which was going to be the, eLearnCon is where we launched this particular game, we really thought about what would the people who are attending this conference really want to be able to get out of it. And so we started with our learning objectives, of course, which were that we assumed people would want to not only think about mobile strategies, but also hear about the types of mobile strategies that other people were employing. And so from that starting point, we started to sort of walk our way backwards into what types of games we could think about and what types of games would make sense. And so it was Chris's initial idea to do a card game, which I think sort of surprised me at first. And so, Rick, if you could show, maybe just pick the speaker or the challenge card.
I think there's a Brent card in there
There's
somewhere.
Is that what you're talking about? Yes, that's a speaker card. So it was Chris's idea to sort of think about this from the card game perspective. And I think that that's really interesting because we're going to a mobile learning conference, and why wouldn't we use a cell phone? And so as we kept walking down the design path, we really realized about halfway through, I think, the design, we had initially included a mobile component of this game. And we realized that that really wasn't adding anything. And so we decided to just make it solely a card game, which I think was very surprising for a lot of the attendees. We kept getting people asking us, do I need a smartphone to play this? And, it's funny. It's a deck of cards, literally. So the game is actually a deck of 54 cards. 2 of them are instruction cards. And I believe Rick is showing us a speaker card, which happens to be our good dear friend, Brent Schlenker. And so essentially, we created a game that we hoped would help people tell their stories and think through different mobile learning strategies from the perspectives of their own experiences in organizations. So Rick, if you could pop up the challenge card.
Okay.
So what we did was we collected real-world mobile learning challenges, and we did that through collecting examples from the eLearnChats that are hosted on Twitter every week, and from basically just talking to our friends who were interested in using mobile learning strategies in their organizations. So we wound up with 20 some odd real-world challenges that are played throughout the game. And in order to play the game, each player has to have their own deck of cards, and we have 4 different types of cards: challenges, hardware cards that include smartphones and non-smartphones and devices, and then technology cards, which include things like web apps and native apps. So in order to play the game, one player would randomly select a challenge card from their deck. And in this case, I'm going to read you guys a challenge card. And it is, you manage a sales team who works frequently in the field visiting clients. You've been tasked with creating a mobile strategy that will allow your sales team to place orders, give current prices, and access client information via their mobile devices. So we've been given a challenge that was derived from some organization or some, known problem that organizations were trying to solve via mobile. And then each player essentially has the opportunity to play some of the cards from their deck. And you can play 1 to 2 hardware cards and 1 to 2 technology cards. And so because I have a sales team who is frequently visiting their clients while in the field, and I've been tasked with creating a mobile strategy that allows them to place orders, give current prices, and access information via their mobile devices, I'm going to assume that I'm going to need either a smartphone or a tablet computer. And so I would select those 2 cards as part of my strategy. I would also decide that I wanted, as far as technology goes, to use both a native app and geolocation. And then I have the option to play an optional speaker card. And I'll tell you guys a little bit more about the speaker cards in a minute. But essentially, by selecting the cards that I've selected from this deck, I've created my own strategy and my own little story about what sorts of things I would do to solve this challenge. And so if I was going to tell this story, I would tell it as, well, I've selected a smartphone and a tablet computer because I want to do a native app, and I want this to be accessible, via the web, and sometimes when web isn't available. And I've included geolocation because I think in order to give current prices and to place orders, some of that pricing, excuse me, might be dependent on location. And if I were going to pick a speaker card, I would probably pick, what is Brent? Brent's podcasts? I would probably pick my own card, because I have a card, which is location-based content, because I would want the content that arrived on that native app to be specific to where I was. And so that would be my strategy. Another player might have a very drastically different strategy that they would then also present. So the real learning component of the game is actually in this talk aloud strategy. And the speaker cards represented not only sorts of implementations, like we had Chris Rockwell was our augmented learning card. We had Rich Collada as a games card. Neil Lasher was a daily tips card. Aaron Silvers was our performance support card, maybe quizzes. Brent had his own card. Excuse me. And as part of the conference, we distributed those cards either within the deck, or you might have to go to a particular speaker session, like Michelle Lentz, who was QR codes, or Judy Brown, who was, I think I said that, performance support. You might have to go to their session to pick up a card, and we did that to try and keep people really interested in collecting portions of the deck and playing the game throughout the conference. So that's the 5-minute tour, although it probably took time.
Is it a game of chance, or is it a game that can be like it? I didn't quite catch if there was. When I think of games, I think of winner and a loser, which correct me if that's not always the premise of a game too, because I guess with learning there doesn't have to be a winner or a loser. So I guess let's kind of iron out that definition. But then my second question is it a game of chance, or is this a game of strategy, or a little of both?
Well, it's actually a strategy game. There isn't a lot of chance, but the winner is actually decided by the players. And so it's also a game of consensus in some ways.
Oh, okay.
In playtesting, which I know Dave, who's in our chat room, was part of, and at the conference, we found that there wasn't a lot of disagreement between players. Players were usually pretty willing to concede, oh, I hadn't thought of that. Oh, that's a really interesting perspective on this. Oh, I like what you've done with this. And we're willing to either say, okay, I think my idea was better, or to say, I think you had the better idea. However, we did host a tournament at eLearn, and for that we brought in some actually pretty qualified judges to think through the different talk aloud answers and to determine a winner, so that we could have sort of a unified vision of one overarching winner of the entire conference tournament, which was Brian Dusselblom.
Which was who?
Brian Dusselblom.
Okay.
Another one of our usual suspects.
Yes.
Now, Terrence, do you have a deck of cards?
No, I don't. I saw it. I happened to be with Chris last week, so he kind of gave me a little bit of a tour of what the cards look like. But as far as the gameplay, I didn't really get a chance to see the game played in action. So I'm trying to visualize the images that you sent us, what I saw as far as the cards from Chris, and what you just explained to us. You sent one picture with it looked like a beer on the table. So I guess if you want that controversy and debate, that's definitely a way to go, is to introduce the alcohol into the game.
Yeah, Rick, will you pull up that picture? I think it might be called, oh gosh, I don't know what that one's called. It might be called playtesting. I think that might be Dave's hand in that
I actually
picture.
don't have that one, but I have this one. I'm not sure if that's...
Let me see.
You just showed it not too long ago.
Yeah, that one. This is it.
Excellent. Yes. So we did extensive playtesting, which involved, it turns out, a lot of beer, and and we found that to be a critical component. We haven't quite figured out how to make it a drinking game yet, but I think that is certainly possible.
So that's the game. So that's the game Catalyst, right?
Yeah.
Fuel. It's the
fact,
game
yes,
fuel.
actually, no, it was through that playtesting that basically what we realized early on is if you want to keep playtesters engaged, it's best to buy them beer during the playtesting. But
Well, and now that I see some of the
testing's
list
really
of who
been,
attended, I see you got David Kelly in there. Chris said Jane, so I'm assuming that's Jane Bozarth.
that's Jane Bozarth, yep.
And then I'm assuming Chris was somewhere in that room, so I can almost understand why the alcohol was there.
Yeah, it didn't hurt. And that
Now,
was a
go ahead.
yes, actually yes. Chris has just put up an interesting fact. In the presentation we did a presentation at eMlearn, which we titled "The Making of a Game of Phones." Every single playtesting photo did have alcohol in it. It actually had beer in it. In our initial playtesting, the first ever rounds, and I think that you can see in those pictures that our initial prototypes of the game were sort of cutouts, sort of taped to different colored note cards, which was pretty funny. But even in those early pictures, you see beer as a predominant theme.
Now, was that at a conference you were testing this, or was this off someplace else?
No, it was at a bar. No,
Okay.
actually,
Well, because I look at the geography. I mean, you got Jane is in Atlanta, Dave's in New York. I forget where Chris is in Pittsburgh. How can I forget
Chris
that?
is in Pittsburgh, yeah.
And you're in
It was
Orlando, so that's
actually-
why I was assuming you had well, either everybody flew to you or that this was done someplace where this group of the usual suspects happened to be gathering.
Yeah, it was actually ASTD ICE.
Oh, okay.
And so everyone happened to be in Orlando for that conference, and so we put together a couple of groups and got to play a little bit.
Okay, cool.
Oh, good. Thank you, Chris. Chris has just put in the chat the slide share on that holds the wonderful slides that he created for the making of a game of phones. If you want to see more pictures of cards and beer, follow that link.
That's the professional version that goes to the Defense Institute, huh?
Exactly. But it was it was a really big learning experience for us. I mean, what we structured as sort of a game that we were really interested in for the specific learning objectives of eMlearn really quickly evolved, probably after our first day of playtesting, into what we now consider to be a really interesting framework that we can apply to just about any type of problem that it's important that you actually have the chance to think through. And so at its purest form, the challenges are our everyday problems. The different types of cards that are played could either be technology, constraints within your organization. We can set up different types of limitations, budget, time. And so we've created a framework that we think is really going to be applicable to a lot of different types of problems. So we're really excited about the potential to try it on some other problem topics as well.
What did you learn in coming into the playtest that changed the initial structure of the game, if anything had to be changed?
Oh, it did. Excuse me. So I actually had typed out the challenges. We collected them from a lot of different places, but I actually typed them out and taped them to the cards. And so I felt like I had a pretty good insight onto what the appropriate solution for any given challenge card might be. And I believe it was the very first playtest. The initial iteration of the game had a web-based component where instead of having the 2 players or the 4 players or however many decide who the winner is, we had little numbers on each card. And so you see on some of the cards a little number at the bottom. And we hoped people would text in those numbers to a web app that would then open up that solution for voting on Twitter, essentially. And that was sort of going to be our social component of the game. And so I thought I had all the answers, and we thought that you would play these cards and that would sort of form the solution. So the very first time Chris and I sat down, just the 2 of us at a bar with these note cards, I put down a challenge card and I'm like, oh, I know this one. So I put down my answer to those cards and was sort of looking at it like, okay, well, this is the obvious answer. And Chris put down something completely different. And I was like, well, why'd you play that? And he explained it to me, and I was like, oh, well, I played this because this is what I was thinking. And it was the huge aha moment that we didn't need anything else. We didn't need the web app, we didn't need the Twitter voting, and we didn't need, to sort of add this superficial technology level, because the real value had happened just right there. And having that, why did you play that? Oh, well, this is why I played this conversation. That it wasn't just limited to, I would use this technology and this software solution, that it really was about why and how, and that was where the real learning was going to come from.
Now, I have a question for both of you. Terrence is searching for world domination, and yours is imminent.
Oh, imminent, absolutely.
Right. So, have you guys fought it out yet?
Well, we may have to collaborate.
Uh-oh.
It's a safer mechanism, Terrence. It really is. If you can't beat them, join them.
That's right.
You might want to just get on the bandwagon now. I'm teasing.
We can probably take the northern and the southern hemisphere, or the eastern and western hemisphere. We'll split it up that way.
Sounds like a game of Risk happening.
Different regions. I'm okay with that.
Yeah. I just need anything with a climate above 70 degrees.
Above? Oh, you don't like it cold, huh?
No, I hate the cold. Which, coming from New York, I definitely had my fair share of winters out there.
Oh, I bet you did. I know Dave and Hybrid could tell us all about the cold, and you and Gina could tell us all about the warm.
Yeah, and actually in Orlando, it's usually warm.
Oh, it's hot here.
It's hot.
We pass warm right up.
Yeah. Well,
is that where you're originally from? Orlando?
I was actually born in New York, but I've lived in Florida my entire life, so I don't know any different, really. Well, I lived in D.C. for a couple of years in North Carolina, so I like and I can appreciate the seasons in the snow.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Well, both Terrence and I were raised in New York, so...
So what's the next step for the game?
We've been, as I said, we've been really interested in it from the framework perspective. So we're kind of, I would never say we're a game looking for a problem, certainly, because I know Chris has a joke about we're a technology looking for what is it that you say? A technology looking for a home or something. He has a little saying. And so we're certainly not that, but we're really interested in different types of applications. We think that it's really useful for mobile learning, and I think that we've seen some really useful things come out of it, and we're hoping that more people, a solution looking for a business case, thank you, Chris. We're really hoping that more organizations are interested in adopting it and using it and seeing the value in it, certainly. But we certainly want to expand the framework to include different types of problems. We're looking at sales. We're interested in all the way to post-traumatic stress disorder, right? The ability to sort of be faced with a problem and talk out, this is what I would do, what would you do? We think that anything that has that sort of interaction component could be really interesting.
Does this game work in probably not in its current state, but is there value in a solitaire type of player atmosphere where it's just one player using this deck of cards to formulate strategy?
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I did forget a really important component in the design. We definitely had that in mind the entire time, because we wanted every single person at eLearn got a deck of cards. We wanted every single person to be able to take home a tool set and an idea generation sort of item that they could then use. And so absolutely, even by myself, when I lay out challenges and I think about the different technologies or hardwares that I might use with those, and I think through what my solution is, I can also take those and switch them around and think about, okay, how would I defend? There's a lot of different ways to play this game in an organization, ranging from having a tournament where you sort of pick the cards to forcing people to have cards and then defend that solution and asking them to see a completely different perspective. Mm-hmm. We've included blank cards in technology and hardware so that people can write in their own organizational components that might be relevant. We feel that organizations who might not have access to things like tablets or smartphones can still use the tool set by just essentially taking those cards out, right? You can't play them anymore. All you have is non-smartphones. Now answer these challenges and tell us how you're going to do it. And so we definitely think that there's a lot of really interesting uses by yourself with this game.
Okay. So in the future, we can see this not necessarily being a game of phones, but it could be a game of social learning platforms, or a game of social media sites, or a game of just about anything you can think of.
Chris says that if you order a deck of a Game of Phones, I will personally sign my card for you. Which I will. That was a really interesting component. We put in, as I said, the speaker cards because we wanted to keep people playing the game during the conference. We wanted it to be very personalized to the conference experience. But it actually did become sort of this fun little thing where people were really interested in making sure that they had collected the full deck of cards. You could easily play it without having collected the speaker cards, but certainly there were a couple of benefits to having the speaker cards. Sure. And so it was really fun. So we actually got to autograph a lot of cards. And if you don't know me that well, then you don't know that my favorite thing in the world to do is to autograph things because it so rarely happens. I actually always have a pink Sharpie with me, always, just in case. And I have a whole set of them right here.
Well, see, I feel neglected because I've known you for a few years now, and I've never once received anything with an autograph from you on it.
I will send you an autographed deck of cards. I can't believe you don't have one. I'm really sorry. We should have thought ahead and gotten one to you last week. I was hoping we could have played online because it is really hard, I think, to think through the value and to think through or to see how interesting it is until you've actually played it. I had to drag Brent Schlenker during the conference into a chair and say, no, you're actually going to sit and play with me. And only as he played was he like, oh, I get it. And I think Dave probably didn't understand why we were having him do this silly thing with these colored note cards until we actually got into the talk through before he started to really see the value. And so it is sort of abstract without having it in front of you and getting to actually experience it.
Well, that's the least Brent could do is play, since he is one of the cards. I mean, my goodness.
Yeah, I mean.
Now, how long did it take to develop the game?
We spent probably about a month in talking about it and thinking about it and trying to determine what the best thing that we could do would be. And then we finally hosted the eLearnChat where we got most of the challenges. And I believe it was a week later that we had sort of typed those in that we started play testing. And at that point, we probably only had about a week left to print. And so from what I would say was, after sort of having an initial concept and knowing that we were going to sort of collect this information and see how it played, we probably had one solid week to put the whole thing together and to balance it and to make sure that we were really thinking through what sorts of things people would want to have in their decks and making sure that everything made sense and creating the decks in time to get them to eLearn. So it was a pretty short production cycle.
Now, can we expect to see this game at DevLearn?
We are hoping to bring it back for DevLearn. We are planning on doing a game at DevLearn, and it's going to be another hybrid Zarina combination, I'm super happy to say, because I think Chris and I really enjoyed working together on this one. Mm-hmm. You'll notice he's not heckling me. I'm very impressed. He must be busy. But
he's actually been very supportive. He's been attentive.
So we have a couple of potential games that we've been talking back and forth with the Guild. One, of course, would be to bring Game of Phones back as it exists, Game of Phones. We could do the Game of Phones infrastructure and do a game of Chris, if you remember what the name of what we were going to call a card game for DevLearn was, maybe a game of Dev or something like that, where we would do something, again, specific to the conference that included its speakers and
he's commenting on his his drinking issues.
So we could do something specific to the development of e-learning, certainly for DevLearn, that we think would be really interesting. And then we have another game on the table, which we are currently calling a game of badges. And I think that it becomes evident that me and Chris watch too much cable, and a game of is sort of the direction that we're probably always going to go in these joint games. But a game of badges is actually the gamification conference. And so it's very, most basic construct is that through attending sessions or visiting vendors or going to lunch or meeting people, you would text in very simple codes that would start to equal badges. And so if you went to every vendor in the expo hall, you might get the Swag Hunter badge. And if you went to every coffee break, you might get the Caffeine Freak. And if you met a bunch of people, you might get a Social Butterfly badge. And if you went to all of the sessions on social media, you might get a Social Media Superstar badge. And essentially, people would start collecting these badges, and there would be a prize at the end, which would be hopefully an iPad, something really interesting. But the real outcome of that game from the organizational perspective would be that we're starting to get people to tell us themselves about their informal learning experiences at conferences, and that in doing that, we can start to draw conclusions about what they've learned. So based on the codes that someone has texted in during the game, I might be able to now draw inference of the knowledge that they've gained during the conference. And eventually that could be transitioned into the formal learning system.
So what kind of information have you been gathering as far as knowledge or any outcomes yet?
None, because that game would be very, very specific to DevLearn. So as DevLearn starts to put up its schedule, we'll start to research the concepts and the topics within each of those and start to sort of come up with the very high level. We can make this assumption that someone at least has an understanding of, I don't know, what HTML5 is. Someone at least has an understanding of how to create a podcast. And it's that level of very light inference that will begin to draw about people.
Now, I have to tell everybody that as you see Alicia laughing, it's because she's reading her chats coming from Chris and Dave. So for those of you that aren't seeing the chat window, I don't want you to think that that she's crazy.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. You can't see the chat window. Apparently, the word
she's being heckled.
I'm being heckled, yes. The word gamification is sort of a hot button word right now. I think that we would all categorically agree that it's not the right word. And I think that we would probably, a lot of us would agree that it's inappropriate for learning because it sort of implies an extrinsic motivational structure on something that perhaps doesn't do its best when it's extrinsically motivated. But it is the word, unfortunately, that's being used. And a lot of organizations are starting to adopt gamification structures. And this is sort of an example of a type of gamification of a conference that, kind of allows us to draw inferences for good. Exploitationware is what Chris calls it.
Well, that happens with every word. I mean, when we think of e-learning and when we think of anything with the 2.0, suffix attached to it, as an industry, and this isn't just the learning industry, this is every industry, somebody gets a hold of the word and they just run whichever direction they want to run with it. So I think gamification probably fell into that gaming was victimized by gamification, just like everything else gets victimized by lingo.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that word is probably public enemy number one. Perhaps number two if you want to count edutainment, but pretty close.
And don't forget learnification.
Learnification. Oh, we have Aaron Silvers during one of his talks at eLearn said codification, which is a legitimate word. However, we decided it was the gamification of COD, and he hasn't let that one down yet.
And Dave is calling it Aliciafication.
Aliciafication, yes. Gaming 2.0. Oh, Gaming 2.0 will be another fantastic buzzword. And, they're buzzwords, and that's what they are. But sometimes they're the best description. I can't think of what I would call the game of badges from the conference perspective now that the word gamification exists, aside from the gamification of a conference. Like, I think that that's really now the most appropriate word for it.
Sure. And I guess the good thing is that at least it pulls people in to pay attention to it, and it gives those that are truly the thought leaders behind those words an opportunity to explain what it is. Because right now there's a little confusion. I'm going to call it confusion because I think people are lumping simulations and games together. And, that was one of the things that Chris had mentioned during our time on the TK board, that they're different. And I agree with him 100%.
But many times a game is a simulation, vice versa, and I think that's why they're probably mixing and matching. There are simulation games.
In my view of the world, I think almost, and wait for the comments to blow up. In my very narrow, shallow view of serious games, every single game has an underlying simulation.
Sure.
So, and I have to say that Dave and I, not Dave, I was reading Dave's post, but Chris and I didn't agree on everything during TK, but we definitely agreed on that simulations, the way people were using simulations as far as the proposals were going, that it definitely wasn't games. And they had a tendency in their proposals, the speakers that were proposing a session, they had a tendency to lump the two together, where typically they were talking about simulations and there wasn't a whole lot of game elements in the proposal. So I think there is some confusion out there on simulation. I think some people are using it thinking that it's a game, and you might even enter it thinking it's a game, but after all is said and done, all you did was a true simulation.
Sure. But, then that begs to differ something that Chris just brought up, which is something like Microsoft Flight Simulator. That is absolutely simulation. There is no game component about that. Unlike the space shuttle simulation, the space shuttle landing simulation, the little mobile game that we love so much. And both of them are very valid simulations. But the space shuttle simulation gives you very interesting feedback. It gives you points. It assigns a rating. Does Microsoft Flight Simulator? Okay, I'm getting slack now on the chat feed. I am being told that Microsoft Flight Simulator does have game elements, and
they do have some game elements of it, and they have races and other things that they do, because you can have online flights going on at the same time. I like Flight Simulator, and unfortunately Microsoft killed it, for all those who don't know that, about a year ago. But you can have races. They even have, it's not really a game, it's really more of a simulation, as far as you can be a virtual pilot and work your way up from a co-pilot all the way up to a pilot. So I guess there's a fun element to that, but it's not really a game in that respect. But the races are.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I think we hear you.
Okay, I thought I lost.
It was just an awkward silence.
It was a moment of awe-inspiring thought.
we were processing. That's all.
Yes. So I didn't get to see the papers that you guys considered for ASTD, but I think that probably is a pretty common thing, that in absence of any gaming elements, that things are being used in the name of games because they're computer-based, and perhaps even because they're being built on a games-based platform or an engine, and that perhaps, if we were to break them down to fundamental levels, we would find that they're not so gamey after all.
Now, Alicia, where do you see games as fitting the best in a corporate environment? Where would you see the biggest benefit of that?
So a lot of the stuff that we're thinking about under Serena is related specifically to sort of the corporate environment, and I think that the corporate environment has become maybe not completely turned off by games, but are definitely becoming more hesitant in the concept of games, because I think often they don't know enough to be able to think about how and when they should implement games in a meaningful manner. And so I think that there's probably about 1 billion uses in corporate education, in any type of education, for games. But it's not for everything, of course. And there's a lot of different types of games. There's large games, there's games to teach, there's casual games, there's the types of games that maybe would make a much better performance evaluation. There's contest-related games. And I think that organizations are just right now at the point where they're having sort of a hard time determining what sorts of outcomes they might want to get from games, and sort of backfitting again in the design process into how do they reach those outcomes, and is a game the most appropriate thing?
Well, since we have just a few minutes left, I figured I'd ask this question. And knowing that you are on Google Plus, I wanted to know what your initial thoughts are of Google Plus. So shift gears a little bit on you.
Sure. So, little known fact about Alicia. I haven't been all that active on LinkedIn. I am very active on Facebook, but mostly in the professional circles, not to use the word that Google Plus is using, but in the professional aspect of Facebook. I don't tweet a whole lot of new content. And so far, Google Plus has been really nice in that it seems to be a very professional, content-oriented sort of place. Like right now, all of the friends that I have in Google Plus are posting really meaningful, really interesting things. As I start to accrue more, acquaintance-based friends, it's nice that I could sort of segregate those and sort of get the more meaningful professional interactions in. But that same kind of thing can be accomplished through Facebook. And so I don't know yet. It's another place that I have to go look for stuff for me right now. And I just don't know that right now it's worth it for me to keep adding all of my stuff to a new place.
And there's the same people. There's only so many networks we can be on at any one time and be efficient. So I kind of wonder, okay, here's another one. Will it beat Facebook? Is it going to compete with Facebook? Will Facebook win? Or what's coming after those? Hard to say.
Yeah, I heard on the news this morning that MySpace is now third in social networks, that it's now Facebook and then LinkedIn and then MySpace, which I guess previously MySpace had held the number 2 spot, but they're saying in the next couple months that Twitter will beat that as well, dropping MySpace down to, I suppose, number 4. But I guess I didn't know anyone was still using MySpace.
I think just bands, rock bands.
Yeah,
it seems to be a music place,
following.
right?
It's really big in the music world. I'm not even sure the teens go on it anymore, but but definitely bands. That's their big place.
Music and porn. It seems like that's a big place for
on
it as
MySpace.
Well. Yeah, well, at least it used to be. I don't know how much they've cleaned it up.
I wonder why that is. I wonder why musicians don't just put their stuff on YouTube and then link it to Facebook.
Well, they do that too.
Oh, okay.
But I think MySpace gives them some special promotional type stuff. They have some. I know a couple of musicians, and they love it for just that.
Interesting. There must be something that they're getting.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to be moving away from that direction. I think that they're going to try to dig themselves in deeper there because they just got purchased. And that was probably part of the reason why they've been losing so much momentum, is that they've been for sale for the last year or so. So now they have a purchaser, and the purchaser also has a celebrity name attached to it. So Justin Timberlake is now a part owner of MySpace. So I think the music elements definitely, music and entertainment, I think are going to be strong elements for them. Yep.
You know, Terrence, you sent me a Google Plus invitation. I still haven't gotten it.
I don't know, Rick. I don't know what that. I'll try to send it again.
Unless it's just backed up, because it might be their servers are just flat out backed up.
No, maybe I put in the wrong email address, because I've opened up that page on the ISD fan page where people can send me their email without everybody in the world seeing their email, and that I would give them a Google invite based on filling out that information and getting it back to me. And they've been getting it. I've been seeing them popping up on Google Plus. So I have to
maybe send it to my Gmail. I think you sent it to the corporate one in May for some. I don't know if it got filtered. I didn't see it in spam.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll talk offline on that.
Okay.
All right. Great. Well, Alicia, how do we get a hold of you or Chris or whoever we need to get a hold of to purchase our deck of the Game of Phones?
We have a website, of course, and that is agameofphones.com, which is a pretty simple address. Also, you can reach me and Chris. Both of our company's websites are on there, as well as phone numbers and email addresses. Yep, there it is.
And it's agameofphones.com?
Agameofphones, yep.
Okay, I just typed it into the chat window there. So did I spell that right?
You got it perfectly right.
Perfect. So everybody click on that link, crash their servers with orders of a Game of Phones. And it looks like a fun game. I wish we would have had time at the meeting Chris and I were at, so I could have gotten a chance to play it with Chris there. But, you know, he was too busy drinking that night, so we didn't have a chance to play it.
He's obviously not paying attention because he's been too quiet for too long.
Yeah, he has been quiet. Oh, no, there he is. He's back.
He is. I made you something special, Terrence.
A signature. An autograph. For you. Great. I'll have to do a screen capture when I go back and look at the recording. So you are Game Czar on Twitter.
Yep, at Game Czar.
And Chris is Hybrid Chris on Twitter as well. So be sure to harass them both
Please
there.
Do.
And you're also on Google Plus, so people can go ahead and put you in a circle in Google Plus.
Absolutely. And if anyone has any questions, comments, absolutely let us know.
Great. And we'll be seeing you at DevLearn too. So that's the next unless are you doing Learning 3.0 conference?
3.0?
Yeah, that's Training Magazine's new conference. I think they just tried to get ahead of the before somebody else took the name. I think they just tried to get in there and.
You mean they didn't do the Adobe thing of 2.5?
2.75.
2.75.
Sure it's there yet.
I can't make that one. I'm going to be at Games 5.0.
5.0.
And it looks like Stevie is saying she's going to Learning 3.17.14. So that's a new version of it.
That's a good one.
That sounds like a Star Trek date.
It looks like her IP address. She might have just publicly given us all her IP address. So we won't see you at Learning 3.0. Well, actually, I wasn't going to Learning 3.0 either, but people won't see you at Learning 3.0 for this. The next conference they'll see you at is DevLearn.
At DevLearn, I'm doing a pre-conference workshop, one of the certificate programs on engaging games for organizations again. And then we'll be hosting a game out there, Chris and I. So hopefully we'll get to see everyone then. Hopefully everyone will enjoy it.
Great.
Sounds good. That is our goodbye music.
Goodbye music.
Alicia, thank you so much for joining us today.
You've been great, Alicia.
Terrence,
and don't hang up yet, because after Rick is just going to shut off the recording soon.
Right. So for all of you in the chat room, hang out for a little bit. And Alicia, thank you so much for being on the show. Terrence, till next week.
Till next week, when we have Anders Gronstedt will be coming on the show next week. He'll be talking about, we have him talking about virtual worlds, but I think the conversation will probably encompass a lot more than just virtual worlds, because he gets his hands into a lot of things.
Well, you know the old joke, right?
What's that?
A neurotic builds castles in the sky, a psychotic lives in them, and a psychiatrist collects the rent. Goodbye, everyone.
Well, that's a good note as any to end the show on.
Goodbye, everyone. Have a good one. Thanks.
Take care, everyone. See you next Tuesday.